I don't remember the drive-in. That's the first thing I should tell you, because it matters later, though I didn't understand why at the time. I remember the airport in Fairbanks. I remember the small plane after that, a twin-engine thing that smelled like old coffee and cold metal, and I remember the pilot, a heavy man who didn't talk much except to tell me to keep my belt fastened because the air over the range got rough this time of year. I remember the window going white. Not cloud white. Ground white. The kind of white where you can't tell if you're looking at the sky or the snow because there's no line between them anymore. And then I remember arriving. Standing in the entry vestibule with my duffel bag, snow melting off my boots onto the rubber mat, and a man named Renner shaking my hand. But the drive from the airstrip to the station, the part where someone must have picked me up in a vehicle and driven me across the tundra, I don't have that. There's just a gap. At the time I told myself I'd fallen asleep. I was exhausted from travel. That's a normal thing. People sleep. I want you to keep that in mind, because by the end I stopped being sure that was a thing that happened to me only once. The station was called WX9. Officially it had a longer designation, a string of letters and numbers that went on a form, but everyone just called it 9, or sometimes the White Station, though I never learned if that was its real nickname or just what the night crew called it because of where it was and what surrounded it. It sat on the North Slope, well above the Brooks Range, in a part of Alaska where the nearest town wasn't a town, it was another station, and the nearest station was 140 miles away. There were no roads in the way you'd think of roads. There was a graded track that the supply runs used in summer, and in winter there was the ice and the dark and the radio. The building itself was low and long, built into the permafrost on pilings so the heat from inside wouldn't thaw the ground and make the whole thing sink. From the outside it looked like a shipping facility, all corrugated steel and white-painted siding, with a forest of antennas and the big radar dome on the roof like a golf ball someone had left on a roof and forgotten. There were outbuildings. A generator shed. A fuel depot with 2 enormous tanks. A garage for the snow machines and the tracked vehicle they called the Cat. And around all of it, nothing. Flat white nothing in every direction, going out to a horizon that, in the winter months, you could only locate by the faint difference between a black sky and a black ground. I was hired as a weather observer. That was the actual job. I had the training. I'd done 2 seasons at a station in the Aleutians, which is how I qualified, and the pay at 9 was nearly double, which is why I applied. They told me the premium was for the isolation and the conditions. That was true. It just wasn't the whole truth. And I've come to think that the people who told me that didn't know the whole truth either. That's the thing about the place. Almost nobody there knew everything. Everybody knew a piece, and the pieces had been arranged so they didn't fit together. Renner ran the station. He was maybe 60, gray, with the kind of face that had spent decades outdoors and stopped reacting to weather. He gave me the orientation on my first day, walking me through the building with a clipboard, which I remember thinking was strange because he clearly knew the place by heart and didn't need to read anything. I think the clipboard was a habit. A way of making the conversation feel official. He showed me the control room first. That was the heart of the station. A long room with no windows. None of the interior rooms had windows, only the corridors that ran along the south wall, lit by banks of fluorescent tubes that hummed at a pitch you stopped hearing after the first hour and started hearing again at 3 in the morning. Rows of equipment. The radar repeater. The barometric instruments. The radio bench with its stack of transceivers and the logbook on a chain so it couldn't be taken out of the room. You log every observation here, Renner said. Top of every hour. Temperature, pressure, wind, visibility, precipitation, cloud, anything anomalous. You write it in the book and you transmit it on the schedule. You understand the schedule? I said I did. Synoptic hours, every 6 hours, with hourly observations in between. Standard. Good, he said. Then he tapped the logbook with one finger. Some observations don't go in the book. I waited for him to explain. He didn't. You'll learn which ones, he said, and moved on to show me the mess. I should have asked? I've thought about that a great deal since. I should have stopped right there and asked him what he meant. But you have to understand the situation I was in. I had just arrived. I was the new person. The new person doesn't challenge the man who runs the station on the first afternoon. The new person nods and follows and learns the rhythm of the place, and trusts that the things that seem strange will make sense once they understand the system. That's how it gets you. Not with a shock. With a series of small things you decide to understand later. There were 9 of us at 9. I noticed the number and made a joke about it to one of the technicians, a younger guy named Pell, and he didn't laugh. He said the number changed. Sometimes there were 8. Sometimes there were 10. He said it the way you'd state a fact about the weather, and then he went back to what he was doing. Besides Renner, Pell, and me, there was Sorensen, the senior observer, who I'd be working opposite of on the OBS rotation. There was Maddox, who ran the radio and the comms. There was a mechanic named Boyd, and a generator engineer named Cruz, and a cook named Linda who was the only person who seemed entirely normal the entire time I was there, and a woman named Aldous who I was told was the site scientist, and whose actual function I never fully understood. That was 8. I counted myself to make 9. But I'll be honest with you, because I promised myself when I started telling this that I'd be honest even about the parts that make me sound unreliable. I never managed to see all 9 of us in the same room at the same time. There was always someone on shift, someone sleeping, someone in the outbuildings. It's a perfectly ordinary explanation. A station runs around the clock. People are always elsewhere. I'm only telling you that I never verified the count with my own eyes, and that when I tried to, the attempt always seemed to slide out of my hands, like I'd set out to do it, and then found myself doing something else. The first 2 weeks were ordinary. I want to be clear about that, because the easy way to tell this story would be to make everything ominous from the first minute, and that's not how it was. How it was boring. I worked 12-hour shifts. I'd come into the control room and take the handover from Sorensen, who spoke in short, flat sentences and never once asked me a personal question the entire time I knew him. I'd settle in at the bench. Every hour I'd take the readings, walk the instruments, some of them were outside, in a louvered shelter on a post, and I'd suit up and go out into the cold to read the thermometers and check the precipitation gauge, and I'd come back in and write it all down and transmit on schedule. The cold outside was not like cold I'd known before. In the Aleutians it was a wet cold, a cold with weight and wind and the smell of the sea in it. At 9 the cold was a dry, total, mineral thing. At 40 below your breath froze in the air and fell. The hair in your nose froze instantly. If you touched bare metal your skin welded to it. The snow didn't crunch, it squeaked, a high dry sound underfoot. And the silence, when the wind dropped, the silence was so complete it had a pressure to it, like being underwater. You could hear your own heart. You could hear the blood in your ears. I'd stand out at the instrument shelter at 2 in the morning with my headlamp making a small cone of light in an ocean of black and white, and I'd hear nothing at all, and it was the loneliest sound I have ever experienced, the sound of nothing. Inside it was the opposite. Inside it was the hum of the fluorescents, and the whir of the equipment fans and the low thrum of the generator coming through the floor, and somewhere, always, faintly, a clanking. An industrial sound. Metal on metal, irregular, distant. I asked Boyd about it my first week, and he said it was the heat exchangers cycling. I believed him. It's a perfectly good explanation. Heat exchangers do cycle. I noted only later that the sound didn't keep the rhythm of machinery. Machinery is regular. This was irregular in a way that, if I'm honest, sounded less like a machine and more like something moving around in a large space, and occasionally touching the walls. But that's hindsight talking. In the first 2 weeks I thought it was the heat exchangers, and I slept fine. The first thing that didn't fit, I almost didn't catch. It was during a synoptic observation, the 4 times a day big report. I was logging a developing low-pressure system that had been building to the northwest all day. The barometer was dropping, the wind was backing around, cloud was thickening, a textbook storm coming in off the Arctic Ocean. I logged it. I transmitted it. And Sorensen, who was supposed to be off shift but had come into the control room for reasons he didn't state, looked over my shoulder at the transmission and said quietly, "Not that one." I asked him what he meant. He reached past me and made a small adjustment to the log. Where I'd recorded the falling pressure and the approaching system, he drew a single thin line through the cloud and precipitation observation and wrote, in the margin, a code I didn't recognize. 3 letters. Then he initialed it. "That system's not for transmission," he said. "Log the OBS for our records. Don't relay it." "It's a storm," I said. "It's the biggest thing on the chart. If I don't relay it, the regional forecast is going to be wrong." "The regional forecast accounts for it," Sorensen said. "Just not from us." I didn't understand that. It didn't make sense. If the storm wasn't in our transmission, how could the regional forecast account for it? Unless someone, somewhere, already knew it was coming, and had told us, in advance, not to report it. Which would mean the censorship wasn't about hiding the storm from us. It was about making sure the official record never showed that we had seen it. I didn't think all of that at the time. At the time I just thought, this is one of the things Renner meant. The observations that don't go in the book. Except this one did go in the book, our book, the chained logbook in the control room. It just didn't go out on the wire. So there were 2 records. The real one, that stayed in the building. And the official one, that went out to the world, that had a hole in it exactly the shape of certain storms. I asked Sorensen which storms. He looked at me for a long moment. He had pale eyes, and they didn't have much in them. "You'll be able to tell," he said. "After a while. They feel different." And he left. That night the storm came in, and it was the first time I felt what he meant, though I wouldn't have been able to put it into words. It came in the way storms come in, with rising wind and driving snow and the building starting to groan against it. The visibility dropped to nothing. The whiteout was total. You couldn't see the instrument shelter 20 feet from the door. All of that was normal. What wasn't normal was the radio. I should explain the radio, because it becomes important. Maddox ran the comms, but everyone on OBS duty had to use the radio for the transmissions, so I was on it constantly. There were several systems. There was the satellite link, which was modern and clean and which we used for the official transmissions. There was the HF set, the high-frequency long-range radio, which could bounce signals off the ionosphere and reach across the whole Arctic, but which was subject to all the strangeness that HF is subject to, fading, skip, interference from the aurora. And there was a VHF set for line of sight, which was mostly useless given that there was nothing in our line of sight for 100 miles. During ordinary weather, the HF was noisy but usable. During the storms, the ones that weren't for transmission, the HF did something I'd never heard a radio do. It got quiet. Not static quiet. Not the rushing hiss of an empty band. Quiet in the sense that the noise floor itself dropped, the constant background crackle of the atmosphere falling away to nothing, so that the band sounded dead, the way the air outside sounded dead in the silence. And in that deadness, occasionally, there was a sound. Low. Slow. It came in on no particular frequency. You could turn the dial, and it was just there, underneath everything, the same on every channel, which is not how radio works. It was a sound like a voice played far too slowly to make out words, or like a very large door, very far away, opening over the course of several minutes. The first time I heard it I called Maddox. He came into the control room, listened for about 3 seconds, and turned the HF off. "We don't monitor HF during these," he said. "During which?" "You'll learn," he said, which is what everyone said, and he left the set off, and we rode out the storm with the radio dark. I sat there in the humming fluorescent light, the storm screaming against the walls, the official log open in front of me with a hole in it where the storm should have been, and I understood for the first time, in a low, quiet animal way that I couldn't have defended to anyone, that something was wrong with this place. Not dramatically wrong. Wrong like a smell you can't locate. Wrong like a room where the furniture has been moved a few inches. And then the storm passed, and the noise floor came back, and the sun, what passed for the sun in those weeks, a gray glow on the southern horizon for a few hours, came back, and everything was so ordinary again that I talked myself out of it. That's the cycle I lived in for a long time. Notice. Doubt. Forget. Notice again. I started keeping my own notes. Not in the official log and not in the station's records. In a paper notebook I'd brought for letters home, which I never wrote because there was no way to send them and because I'd stopped being able to think of what to say. I started logging the storms that weren't for transmission. I gave them numbers since they didn't get names. That was another thing I noticed, that the censored storms never received the rotating alphabetical names that storms get. They were just struck through and marked with that 3-letter code. So in my own book I numbered them. The first one I'd witnessed was the one Sorensen corrected. I called it 1, even though it clearly wasn't the first the station had ever seen. It was just the first I'd seen. By the time I got to 4, I'd found the pattern, and the pattern was the thing that broke my ability to keep doubting. The censored storms didn't behave like weather. A real storm has a life. It builds, it peaks, it decays, it moves. You can track it across the chart, watch it come from somewhere and go to somewhere. The censored storms didn't do that. They appeared. The barometer would be steady, the chart clean, and then over the course of about 40 minutes the pressure would simply fall, locally, with no front, no system, no source, as if the low were forming directly over us out of nothing. And they didn't move. They sat on the station, exactly on the station, for as long as they lasted, which was always a number of hours that I eventually realized was always the same, a little over 19 hours, every time, no matter the apparent intensity. And then they didn't decay. They stopped. The pressure came back up, the wind died, the snow ended, all within an hour, the way a faucet turns off. Weather does not do that. Weather is a fluid. It does not switch on and off, and it does not anchor itself to a single building in the middle of a continent, and stay precisely there for precisely 19 hours and then leave. I checked my numbers 3 times because I didn't believe them. Then I checked the spacing between the storms, and that's when my hands got cold in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. The censored storms were periodic. They came, on average, 11 days apart. Not exactly, there was a little scatter, but close enough that I could predict the next one within a day or 2. I started doing that. I'd write in my book, next one due around the 14th, and it would come on the 14th, or the 15th. I'd predicted weather my whole career. You can't predict weather 11 days out. Nobody can. The atmosphere is chaos. You're lucky to be useful at 5 days. But these I could predict, because they weren't weather. They were a schedule. Something was on a schedule, and the station's job was to be there when it kept its appointment, and to make sure the rest of the world never knew it had. I want to tell you about the safety routines, because this is where the others started to frighten me more than the storms did. When a censored storm was coming, and they always knew before I did, Renner would post a small handwritten card on the mess notice board with a time on it, and nothing else, and everyone understood. The station changed. First, the radio went dark, all of it, not just HF. Maddox would shut down the satellite link too, which meant for the duration of the storm we were transmitting nothing, receiving nothing, completely cut off. I asked why we shut the satellite, which had nothing to do with the atmosphere. Maddox said the storms got into the equipment. I asked what that meant. He said the satellite link had, on 3 occasions before my time, transmitted things during a storm that nobody had typed. He said it the way you'd report a mechanical fault. He didn't elaborate, and I didn't push, because his face when he said it was not the face of a man telling a ghost story. It was the face of a man who'd decided long ago to stop thinking about something. Second, we sealed the exterior. Every external door was locked and a heavy bar was dropped across it. Not to keep weather out, the doors were already weathertight. The bars were on the inside. They were to keep the doors from being opened. The mechanic, Boyd, walked the building before each storm and checked every bar, every window cover, every vent, with a checklist, and he was the only time I ever saw him take anything seriously. Third, and this is the one that I still can't think about without a tightness in my chest, We did not look outside. The corridors along the south wall had small windows, reinforced, double-glazed, frosted at the edges. During ordinary storms you could look out and see the whiteout, the snow streaming past in the floodlights. During censored storms, the floodlights were turned off, and a roller blind was pulled down over each window, and there was a rule, never written down anywhere I saw it but understood by everyone, that you did not lift the blinds. I asked Pell why. He'd been there 3 years. He was the one I trusted most, if I trusted anyone. He thought about it for a while, which I appreciated because most people just said, "You'll learn." "Because if you look," he said finally, "sometimes there's something to see. And the ones who saw it don't work here anymore. And I don't mean they transferred." Then he said the thing that I have not been able to get out of my head in all the time since. He said, "Don't look, and it stays weather. That's the deal. It's only weather as long as nobody confirms it isn't." The memory problem started somewhere around the 6th storm. I noticed the gaps before, the drive in that I couldn't remember, small things, walking into a room and not knowing why, the ordinary erosions of a tired mind in a monotonous place. But after the 6th storm it got specific, and it got worse, and it always happened around the storms. The censored storms lasted a little over 19 hours. I knew that from my own measurements, taken before and after. But I could never account for all 19 hours from the inside. I would remember the storm beginning. I would remember sitting in the control room with the radios dark and the blinds down, and the others moving through the building quietly, the way you move in a house where someone is sleeping. And then I would remember the storm ending. And in between there was less time than there should have been. I'd look at the clock at the start, and the clock at the end, and there'd be a piece missing, 2 hours, 3, sometimes more, that I simply did not have. I tried to fight it. During the 7th storm I sat at the control bench and wrote the time in my notebook every 15 minutes, just the time, to anchor myself. I have that page. The entries are in my handwriting, getting shakier as they go. They start at the top of the storm. They are regular for about 4 hours. And then there's a single entry that isn't a time. It's a word. I don't remember writing it. The handwriting is mine but worse, pressed so hard into the paper it almost tears, and the word is standing. And then the entries resume 2 hours and 40 minutes later, the times perfectly normal again, my handwriting calm again, as if nothing had interrupted them. I don't know what was standing. I don't know if it was me. I have a feeling, a bodily feeling, that I spent those 2 hours and 40 minutes on my feet, in the control room, facing the door, doing nothing, and that this is a thing I have done more than once, and that the others have too, and that this is part of the deal, part of being there when the appointment is kept, and that none of us are supposed to remember it, and that the building is built and run in such a way as to make sure we don't. The fluorescent lights, I came to believe, were part of it. They were everywhere, on all the time, far brighter than they needed to be, a flat white light with no shadows and no warmth, and I think their purpose was that under that light you could not dream, you could not drift, you stayed in a kind of waking blankness. It was a light designed to keep you from being fully present so that you would not fully experience the thing you were present for. The storm that broke the pattern came in the dead middle of the dark season, when there had been no real daylight for weeks. I knew it was wrong before Renner posted the card, because by then I'd internalized the schedule. The next storm wasn't due for 6 more days. But the radio started going quiet a week early, the noise floor dropping, that dead silence creeping into the band, and the barometer began doing something I'd never recorded, a slow oscillation, up and down, a few millibars each way, like something breathing. I went to Renner. I brought my notebook, which was a mistake, because it told him I'd been keeping records, but I was past caring. I showed him the schedule. I showed him the periodicity. I showed him this one was early and that the pressure was breathing, and I asked him, directly, for the first time, what we were doing there. He looked at the notebook for a long time. He didn't get angry. That was almost the worst part. He looked tired, and a little sad, and he closed the notebook and slid it back across the desk to me. "You did good work," he said. "Most people don't put it together this clean." "What is it?" I said. not a question. I didn't have the energy for a question mark. I don't know, Renner said. And I believed him. Nobody here knows. The people who built this place knew, maybe. They're long gone. We got the procedures and the procedures work, so we follow them. That's the whole job. We're not here to understand it. We're here to keep the schedule and keep the record clean and keep the doors shut. The record clean for who? He shrugged, and it was the shrug of a man who'd stopped asking that question decades ago. Somebody set it up so the official weather record has no trace of these. So that if you pulled every report from every station for the last 50 years, there'd be no pattern in it, nothing periodic, nothing anchored, nothing that would make anyone come looking. The world's forecast works fine without us. We're not really observing the weather for anybody. We're observing it, and making sure nobody else has to. And the early one? For the first time, something moved behind his face. It's never been early before, he said. That was the most frightened I ever saw him, and he said it very quietly. And then he told me to get some rest before it came, and I knew, the way you know things in that place, that he didn't expect this one to follow the rules. It came at the wrong time, it came too fast, and it did not last 19 hours. The pressure didn't fall over 40 minutes. It crashed, faster than any instrument I'd ever watched, so fast the building creaked and my ears popped and Linda the cook started crying in the mess, quietly, not making a fuss about it, just sitting with tears running down her face the way you'd cry from a bright light. The wind came up to a scream and then past a scream into a register I have no word for, a low roaring under the high howl, two sounds layered, and the second sound was not wind. I'd heard it before. It was the radio sound. The slow door. Except now it wasn't coming through the radio, because the radios were off. It was coming through the walls. We sealed the building. Boyd walked his checklist with his hands shaking. The blinds came down. The floods went off. And we waited. I was on shift, alone in the control room, the official log open in front of me with the hole already in it, the censored storm already not happening as far as the world was concerned. And I made the decision that I've spent every day since both regretting and being unable to imagine not making. I went to find the hidden records. I'd known they existed for a while. Renner had said the people who built the place knew that there were procedures handed down, and procedures have to be written somewhere. There was a part of the station nobody used, a half-level below the main floor where the original foundation works were, accessible by a steel stair behind a door marked only with a number. People called it the basement, though it wasn't really, it was the level where the building met the permafrost. Cruz the engineer went down there for the generator and the heat plant. Nobody else did. I went down during the storm because during the storm everyone else was where they were supposed to be, standing, blank, keeping the deal, and nobody would stop me, and because some part of me had decided that if I was going to lose another 2 hours and 40 minutes of my life to something I wasn't allowed to remember, I wanted, just once, to choose what I did with them. The basement was colder than the rest of the building and the fluorescents down there were old, half of them dead, so for the first time in months I was in dimness, in shadow, and the relief of it was so intense it frightened me, like realizing how thirsty you are only when you finally drink. The storm was louder down there. Closer to the ground, closer to the pilings, I could feel the whole building working against the wind, and under it that other sound, the breathing door, and now that I was below the main floor I could tell something I hadn't been able to tell upstairs. The sound wasn't coming from all around. It was coming from one direction. From the north. From under and slightly north of the building, down where the pilings went into the permafrost, where there should have been nothing but frozen ground 1,000 feet deep. There was a records room. I'd half expected to find it locked, but it wasn't. Nothing down there was locked, because nobody went down there, because the deal held by people not wanting to know, not by walls. It was a small room full of steel shelving, and the shelving was full of logbooks. Decades of them. The real logs, the ones that stayed in the building, going back. I checked the spines, going back 51 years. I pulled the oldest one. I read by my headlamp, sitting on the cold floor with the storm breathing through the walls, and I'm going to tell you what I learned, but I want to be honest that I read fast and I read frightened and I did not get to read all of it, because of what happened next. The storms had not always been periodic. In the early logs they were irregular and rare, a few a year, and the early observers wrote about them with confusion and fear, long entries, frightened handwriting, men trying to understand what they were seeing. There were entries about people who'd looked. There were entries about people who'd gone outside. Those entries ended with the person's name and then nothing, no transfer, no replacement listed, just a name and a date and a blank. And over the years the entries got shorter. The fear went out of the handwriting. The observers stopped trying to understand and started just recording, the way Sorensen recorded, flat and procedural, and as they stopped trying to understand the thing got more regular. As if the watching and the not understanding and the keeping of the deal had taught it something, or settled it into a rhythm, the way a wild thing in a cage eventually stops pacing and learns the schedule of its feeding. The 11-day cycle didn't appear until about year 30. Before that it was learning. After that it was tame, or we were. I'm not sure there was a difference anymore. And there was one more thing, written in the margin of a log from the year I was born, in handwriting I didn't recognize, almost certainly someone long dead. Asterisk, it is not in the storms. It makes the storms. The storms are how it surfaces. We are not the observers. We are the lid. Asterisk. That was when the breathing stopped. I want to be precise about this because it's the part one trusts least in my own memory, and therefore the part one most need to get right. The breathing door sound, which had been constant, stopped. The wind kept screaming, but the second sound, the undersound, just stopped, the way the radio noise floor dropped to nothing, and in its place came the silence. The pressure silence. The underwater silence I knew from standing at the instrument shelter at 2 in the morning, except total, except inside, except all around me in that cold dim room 100 feet below the snow. And in the silence I heard a voice say my name. It came from the north wall. From the direction of the sound. It was not loud. It was conversational, close, as if someone were standing on the other side of the concrete with their mouth near the wall, and it said my name the way you'd say it to wake someone gently, and I knew the voice. That's the thing I can't get past. I knew it. It was a voice from my life, from before, a voice I trusted, and to this day I cannot tell you whose it was, because every time I reach for it my mind hands me a different person, someone I loved, and I know that at least most of those are wrong and possibly all of them, and I think the not knowing is deliberate. I think it reached into me and found the shape of a trusted voice and wore it without bothering to fill in the details. Because the details were for me to supply, because that was the deal. It's only a stranger as long as nobody recognizes it. And I almost answered. I had my mouth open. I had taken a breath. The most natural thing in the world, to answer when someone you love says your name in the dark. What stopped me was the log in my lap. We are the lid. The people who'd looked, whose names ended in a blank. The deal Pell had described, it's only weather as long as nobody confirms it isn't. And I understood, all at once, in my body before my mind, that to answer would be to confirm. To say yes, I hear you, I know you, you're real. That was the looking. That was the lifting of the blind. That was the thing the whole station, the lights, the procedures, the forgetting, 51 years of flat handwriting, existed to prevent. So I didn't answer. I closed my mouth and I held the breath until it hurt, and I pressed my hand over my own mouth and I thought, with everything I had, you are weather, you are only weather, I do not know you, there is nothing on the other side of that wall but frozen ground 1,000 feet deep. And I did not believe it, but I said it inside my head over and over, the way you'd hold a door against something pushing, and the voice said my name again. Less certain this time, and then again, and I felt. This as much as heard it. It withdrew, it went back, the breathing returned, the door, far away, and the wind, and the ordinary screaming of the storm, and I was just a man sitting on a cold floor in the dark with a 50-year-old logbook and tears freezing on my face. I don't know how I got back upstairs. There's a gap. Of course there is. I came back to myself standing in the control room, under the white light, facing the door, the way I think I'd stood through every storm before, except this time I had a logbook in my hands that didn't belong upstairs, and that's the only reason I know the basement happened at all. Without it I'd have nothing. Just the gap, and the feeling, and a name in my notebook I didn't remember writing. The storm ended the way they always did, the faucet turning off, the pressure climbing, the wind dying into the underwater silence, and then into ordinary cold quiet. It had lasted, by my measurements, not 19 hours. 14. It had come early and left early. It had broken its own schedule, and I have never been able to decide whether that's because something was changing, getting stronger, getting impatient, or because I went down there and read the logs and almost answered, and disturbed it, the way you'd disturb an animal that had a routine, and that I'd made it worse for whoever came after me. When the radios came back on, Maddox transmitted the official synoptic report at the scheduled hour. Clear. Cold. Light winds. No storm. The hole in the record, smooth and clean, 51 years deep. Renner found the logbook in my room 2 days later. I hadn't hidden it well. I think part of me wanted him to find it. He didn't shout. He sat down on the end of my bunk with the book in his hands and looked at it for a long time. You went down? He said. Yes. You read it. Some of it. Did you look? He asked. And I knew he didn't mean outside. He meant, did you confirm it? Did you answer? Did you lift the blind? No, I said. He nodded slowly, and something in his shoulders came down, and I realized he'd been carrying that question for 2 days, afraid of the answer, because if I'd answered, I don't know what. He didn't say. He took the logbook and he stood up, and at the door he stopped and said the only thing he ever said to me that sounded like kindness. You can finish your contract, he said. Or you can go out on the next supply run. I'll sign either. But I'll tell you what I tell everyone who finds the bottom of this place. It doesn't matter where you go. You've been a lid now. Part of you stays one. You'll feel it come around. Every 11 days, somewhere in you, you'll feel the schedule. And you'll have to not answer for the rest of your life, wherever you are. It's easier here, where we all do it together and nobody asks you to remember. Out there you do it alone. He left. I took the next supply run. I don't remember the drive out. I told you that mattered at the beginning, and now you know why. There's a gap where the drive out should be, the same shape as the gap where the drive in should be, and I've come to think they're not two gaps. I've come to think they might be the same hours, that arriving and leaving that place are the same act folded over, and that some part of me never made either trip, is still there, standing under the white light, facing the door, being a lid. I live in a city now. South, where it's warm, where there are people and noise and the radio plays music and the band is never, ever dead. I chose it on purpose. I needed the noise. But every 11 days, give or take, there's an evening when the noise gets thin. I can't explain it better than that. The traffic quiets at the wrong time, the neighbors go still, the refrigerator finishes its cycle and doesn't start another, and for a few minutes, never more than a few, the world gets that pressure silence, that underwater quiet, and I feel the schedule turn over somewhere underneath everything, and I know that 1,000 miles north there's a low forming over a building out of nothing, breathing, anchored, keeping its appointment. And 9 people, or 8, or 10, are standing under white lights facing sealed doors, not looking, not answering, keeping the record clean. And on those evenings, sometimes, in the thin quiet, very close, as if from the other side of a wall, a voice I love says my name. I've gotten good at not answering. I've had a lot of practice. I sit very still and I tell myself it's only weather, there's nothing there, I don't know that voice, and I wait, and after a few minutes the refrigerator starts again and a car goes by and the world fills back in, and it's gone, until next time. I've never once answered. But I'll tell you the thing that keeps me up, the thing I haven't told anyone, the reason I'm telling you this at all, in the faint hope that saying it out loud to no one is different from saying yes. The voice is getting more certain. In the beginning, after I left, when it said my name it sounded like it was guessing. Reaching. Trying shapes to see which one I'd answer to. Lately it doesn't guess. Lately it says my name like it knows exactly who I am and exactly where I'm sitting and exactly how long I've been holding the door, and like it has all the time in the world, more time than I have, 51 years and counting, 11 days at a stretch. And lately, just at the end, just before the world fills back in, it started saying something after my name. Quiet. Patient. The same 2 words, every time, in that voice I love and can't place and supply the face for myself because that was always the deal. It says my name. And then it says,